IVM.
Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the Musafir Stories, India's very own travel podcast, where each week we share the journey of travelers in their own words and relive their experiences with you, our listeners.
Hi guys, welcome to a very special episode of the Musafir Stories.
It's a century of episodes today for the podcast that we started 4 years ago, recording from the confines of our bedroom and funnily enough continuing to do so till this date. We'd like to thank all our guests for making this possible in the first place and you, our listeners, for giving us support and motivation to carry on.
The podcast has had the good fortune of having some great guests on the roster and has also accrued over 1 million listens over time. All thanks to you. Please do continue to show your love and support by sharing it with friends and family, and we will strive to bring you fascinating travelogues to your ears. Before we get on with today's episode, a quick shout out to the Great Courses Plus. On our mission of purposeful learning, Great Courses Plus has been a wonderful resource that has helped us get into the depths of the subjects that interest us the most. One such course is The Art of Travel Photography by National Geographic photographer Joel Sartori. Learn everything from lighting to composition to lens and much more that goes into creating a great shot.
We want you to experience the aha moment for yourself with the Great Courses Plus. So sign up for this limited time offer by using the special URL thegreatcoursesplus.com/musafir and get 1 month of unlimited access for free. Do it now, guys. The link is in the show notes section.
As for today's episode, we take you to our home state of Karnataka as we travel back in time with the multi-talented policy geek and podcaster Pavan Srinath. Let's jump onto the episode and find out more. So with that introduction, we'd love to welcome Pavan Srinath, host of the Pragati podcast and Talaharte Kannada podcast. Pavan, thank you so much for being on the Musafir Stories and welcome.
Hey Pavan, welcome to the Musafir Stories, our very own Huduga. Welcome.
Bengaluru Huduga.
Thank you so much, Saif and Faiza. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. And hey, we're all members of the Bangalore podcast fraternity. And it's an absolute delight to do this.
Thank you so much, Pavan. And yeah, it is yet another milestone on the Musafir Stories to have, I call all of you like our version of celebrities.
I know.
Not just for the work on the podcast you're doing, but obviously beyond that as well, you do some great work. So really happy and grateful that you could be on the show. But Pavan, the intro we gave about you was quite concise. So why don't you speak a little bit more about yourself? Obviously the podcast you do, and even beyond that, you do a bunch of things. So why don't you just call them out?
Thank you so much, Saif. I am a public policy researcher. I currently work independently, and willy-nilly I got into podcasting in 2017 when I think in April in 2017 I started the Pragati podcast as a podcast on public policy, international relations, the economy, and so on. And while I've been a researcher for the last 10 years, I also teach various topics within public policy, and it's more recently, I think in December 2018, that I started podcasting in Kannada as well, where it was a few of us thinking that, hey, there are all these conversations happening. We love the medium, as I know that you do as well. And it's a great place for conversation in a country where television is dominated by shouting, right? So we really wanted to bring that to Kannada as well. So that started off. And somehow podcasting seems to have taken over my life. I think around the time of the lockdown in India, I started working with the Bangalore International Center to help them launch their podcast. BIC Talks. And today I am pretty much doing only podcasting and not much of the policy research and other things. But I've been in this space for the last 10 years overall. Before that, I actually studied biosciences. I was trying to do a PhD, decided no, that's not for me, and I ended up here. And I guess I just love talking to people, and I'm sure you feel the same way about Musafir stories as well. It's, I mean, this is a gig where you get people to give you like a master class once a week, right?
Yeah.
Or, take you through a certain topic, take you on a journey once a week. And it's a privilege to be, making a living out of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, listeners would have gotten a hint of the many talents that Pavan has, right from sciences to public policy and now podcasting. So we're really, really glad to have, and yeah, really also glad to have met Pavan in person, being a part of the Bangalore podcasting fraternity. So now, Pavan, you've set up a little bit of a context about you, your background, etc. But what I'm also keenly looking forward to is the topic of discussion today, and I was really excited when you brought it up first when we discussed this. We have a very kind of unique approach to the topic. We're not going to be solely focusing on one place like we usually do, but we're kind of going back in time and throwing the limelight on a certain period of time, right? The Hoysala Empire and their really unique architectural style, especially pertaining to the temple architecture. So I was really excited when you brought this up and referred to this during our initial chats. Do you want to give a little bit of a context around the time period we're talking about and the empire in itself, right? Because we usually tend to kind of put the South Indian kingdoms in a blanket statement, and just Hampi is what people beyond South India recognize, and others are overlooked easily. Would you like to throw some limelight on the Hoysala Empire itself and their origins?
Happy to, sir. So let me bring in a context which ties in a little bit of history and also a little bit of travel. Okay, so now Karnataka has sort of 2.5 World Heritage Sites in the state, right? You have Hampi and the group of monuments there. You have the group of monuments at Pattadakal. These are the Chalukya temples. You have Badami, Aihole, and Pattadakal in northern Karnataka. And, the Chalukya temples are from the 6th to 9th century AD. And Hampi is far younger. It's 15th to 16th century or so. So the Hoysala period in South Karnataka is sort of what sits in between. And the Hoysala Empire was also something that sat in between the Chalukya era and the Vijayanagara era. So it's roughly, think about something like 1000 AD all the way to maybe the beginning of the 14th century or so. For about 250 to 300 years, it was, a regional kingdom which, had humble origins. Eventually, they gained some independence. They became a kingdom of their own and an empire of their own. And at their greatest, they sort of stretched the size of the greater Mysore kingdom that was there during the era of Tipu Sultan, right? Something like that, almost from the Western Ghats to fairly deep into Tamil Nadu at their greatest extent. And it was a time when they built an enormous number of temples, and many of which survive to this day. I think, if I'm not mistaken, there are about 200 to 250 surviving temples from the Hoysala Empire. And of them, I'm sure over half of them are living temples where there's worship that still happens. There's still, pilgrims and others who still go there. And they're also just architectural marvels. And, being in Bangalore, to me, one of the things that's wonderful about the main temples at Belur and Halebeed and the various other temples is that they're all a day's ride away, right? Or less than a day's ride away. So no matter where you're going or what you're doing, you can always make a pit stop, check out something that's in the region, and then, head back home or head on to wherever you're heading to. And for me, I've also explored this region because I have some of my family who hails from the district of Hassan, where many of these Hoysala temples are. And actually, my father comes from a village which is on the banks of the Kaveri. And getting to visit those places as a kid, going to a river, that's an entirely wonderful experience. And I don't know how much can be replicated with when you're going traveling, but I think many of these places are still accessible to a very wide number of people who can go there from Bangalore.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
we happened to, I mean, we were lucky enough to go and experience and see how beautiful these temples are. So, Pavan, with respect to even this differences that one can find with respect to the architecture, would you like to say a little more about that?
Sure. And before that, I'll tell you a little more about the history as well.
Yeah.
You know, even in public policy, in my day job, when we are talking about things like state and government, right, and how did these big entities come about, which have rule of law, which have police, which have armies, and all of that. The example that's given by even serious economists and so on is this idea of stationary bandits and roving bandits, right? Think of Gabbar Singh. And Gabbar Singh also, like, Sholay is set in Ramnagara, not too far from the Hoysala Empire region. Gabbar Singh is this guy who goes and loots villages, right? And Gabbar Singh is actually a bit of an idiot in a variety of ways, because he is essentially a roving bandit. He goes town to town, he collects hafta, doesn't even collect hafta, sorry. Gabbar Singh goes and loots places.
True.
And when you keep looting and raiding places, there is no, I mean, imagine the lives of people there, right? You save anything, Gabbar Singh will come and take it away tomorrow.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
So why will you save? Why will you invest? Why will you build a better house? Gabbar Singh can come and destroy it. So think of India from 1,000, 2,000 years ago, and you would have many people who would be bandits, right? I mean, they'd have 20 people, 30 people with some arms, and they'd go looting. But eventually people realize that, hey, this is kind of stupid. If I have all this power, I'm better off collecting a hafta, right? Because what that means is that I can go back every year and collect this money. And if I collect just the right amount of hafta, then people can still invest. So they can give me some of their money. The rest they can invest such that next year when I go, I can take a little more money, right? And you go from being a dacoit to a guy who collects hafta. You become organized crime. And eventually you realize, hey, you know what? This is the game. This is where it all is. Let me go live there among them. And let me actually start investing some of the money I take into the community such that the pie grows even more. And eventually you get a kingdom. Eventually you get the state. Eventually you get the government. I bring that up in the Hoysala context because the Hoysala kings actually started off as hilltop chieftains in the Western Ghats, right? In Karnataka, we call it the Malenadu.
Right.
And they were, think of any hill range, a group of hills would have, a leader of some sort and, a bunch of people who'd live there. And high up in the Western Ghats, you can, raise a few hardy cattle and do a few things. And some of the works still survive to this day. Like, for example, there's something called the Ballararayan Durga, which is a wonderful 2-day trek out of Bangalore.
Okay.
But, you come down to the plains, you raid, and then you come down to the plains and you collect a hafta and, take protection money. And eventually you realize, hey, life is actually better in the plains. You can live in a nicer house, you can have a better life. And eventually you get the sort of trappings of kingship and so on, right? And then you get legitimized in various ways and you become far more powerful. So the Hoysala Empire is one great example of this happening. And this is a process that you will see elsewhere in India and the world as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's a great
A deeper insight. Yeah.
parallel to draw, I guess. I think it helps people to understand easily as well that it's all not always the formal way of going about things. And this is sort of a rags to riches type of a story. I think at times they were also, like, even after they came into power, they were like, I'd say, feudatory rulers of, I guess, the Chalukyas for a while, right? Before they kind of carved out a niche for themselves. So that way,
Absolutely,
it's
absolutely.
quite the journey.
They
right?
were feudatories to the Chalukyas, but the Chalukya power itself was in decline.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the Cholas were quite powerful. So, Cholas at one point had conquered much of South Karnataka, where the previous feudatories were the Gangas, right? So, I'm sure when you were in Bangalore, apart from visiting Belur and Halebid, you would have also gone to Shravana Belagola, right?
Yeah,
Which is
yeah.
an incredible, very unique site with the Jain monument of Gomateshwara, right? I don't think you can find many things of its like elsewhere in the country.
Yeah.
And so South Karnataka was also largely Jain all the way up until 1000 AD or so. And sort of that shaped the region, which is, I mean, you look at it on a map, especially on Google Terrain View, you can see that almost on three sides it's bordered by hills and mountains, right? And it's in the rain shadow. Bangalore is at the very edge of this region, and it just so happened that the Hoysalas sort of slowly started gaining power and became more and more important around 1000 AD and onwards.
And also, like we were touching upon earlier, right? The temple architecture of this time and just the sheer number of temples also that were built during this period was also quite marvelous. Just volumes. I won't even get into the the intricacies and how beautiful it was, but just by volume itself, like there were so many
number of
that was
temples
built during this time, right? And really some interesting kind of stories there as well, like how there was these periods when a number of these were built, and also you see a lot of these temples sitting like side by side. Some of these are focused on Jain basadis that we call, and then there's obviously the Hoysala style temples, right? All of these also, I think it was really an interesting period for the region in itself, right?
Absolutely, because what happened here was, like I said, the region was perhaps there were a lot of people of the Jain faith, and so you have a lot of Jain basadis and so on, and even the Hoysala Empire and the early kings were Jain kings, and but this is also a time where one of the Vaishnavite saints, this guy called Ramanujacharya, comes to Karnataka from Tamil Nadu, and there again, it's very tough to separate history from myth here because there are not great sources at all times, but the story is that Ramanuja meets King Bittideva of the Hoysala kingdom, and Bittideva is a young ambitious king, and Ramanuja sort of wins him over. He becomes a follower of Vishnu and takes on the name of Vishnuvardhana. And Vishnuvardhan without the A is actually a very popular name in Karnataka because of a very famous actor who's no more, but who shaped a lot of modern Kannada cinema, right? And so you have Vishnuvardhana who becomes this king, and I think there was something to the idea of a young kingdom also meeting a new religion in a way, because this was the Bhakti movement reaching Karnataka from Tamil Nadu, and the Bhakti movement sort of goes north thereon over centuries actually, and so I think there was this idea of how the building of the temples and the vibrancy and the number in which they were built being linked to the kingdom and the religion as well. And I think there's also this idea that, people have talked a lot about temples being a pillar stone or a corner of the local village economy back in the day as well, right? Because it was not just a place of worship, but also, people would imagine, there's a lot of hue and cry that happens over, a statue being built in India today, but it is entirely possible that, I don't know, 20% of the GDP of an old kingdom would be spent on temple architecture. It's kind of nuts. And I mean, that's the reason why people would struggle so much, because so much money was diverted there. But, as a result, we've ended up with things that have survived for about 700, 800 years, and that's why we can still go and visit them today. So I think there was that sort of mission mode work on building temples, right? And also a lot of competition. So while Vishnuvardhana worshipped Vishnu, his own wife was still a devout Jain. So there's a lot of competition that also happens. So you have Vishnuvardhana builds the main temple at Belur, right? And the deity is called Chennakeshava, which just means he with magnificent hair, right? It's for Krishna or for Vishnu. And there are rich merchants in the Hoysala kingdom at the time who are like, you know what, we worship Shiva, so let's do some competition. And they actually finance Shiva temples in Halebeedu around the same time. And you have the king's wife who's giving patronage to Jain temples. So through some competition, through a lot of mission mode work, through a lot of things happening, we end up with wonderful temples and numerous temples. And I think each one wanted to be more beautiful than the next, right? So I'm sure there'd be bidding wars over the best sculptors of the time. We don't know how much we can only guess at some of these things, but it is very clear that a lot of love, a lot of labor, and a lot of very, very intelligent thinking went into a lot of these places that survive to this day.
Absolutely. And yeah, thank you for kind of so beautifully calling out and setting context for all of this, right? Because even when, say, in this day and age, when we visit a temple, we do get insights from the guides or whoever shows us around there, but it's so difficult to actually get the backstory, like in what setting all of these temples came up, and what the background of a lot of these empires and the kings and the rulers that built these temples.
And I think even the time period, sometimes you don't realize at what stage.
Exactly. Yeah. So thank you so much for kind of beautifully laying this out for us and setting some very good context before we jump into specifics. And yeah, talking of specifics, while we were touching upon earlier as well, I guess the most iconic of these temples, even though like over 1,000 were built during the Hoysala Empire, to this day the most iconic of these are the temples at Belur and Halebeedu, right? They are like the most prominent ones and get most referred to as the Hoysala temples and the I guess sample of the Hoysala architecture. Do you want to kind of touch upon the kinds of temples one can expect, or even before that, just kind of calling out where these are? I know you said it's pretty close to Bangalore, but if someone's getting there, or when you got there, like how you got there, etc.
Certainly, Seth. We are doing this on the Musafir podcast, and I should not be hogging up the entire discussion talking about history. And the beautiful thing is you can actually go visit this history. So Belur and Halebeedu are certainly the crown jewels of the Hoysala temples, and they're about 200 to I think 240 kilometers away from Bangalore. So if you can get out of the city easily enough, I think it's about 4 to 5 hours drive. How long it'll take you within the city is
another story. Yeah, that's another story.
Depends a lot, but so yeah, they're about 4-5 hours away. So they're places that you can actually make a day trip out of if you want to. It'll be an exhausting day trip, but you can do it. And I think a weekend would be wonderful for visiting Belur and Halebeedu and associated nearby temples and other things as well, right? So for example, if you want to go and visit Shravanabelagala as well, you can do that too in a weekend trip. You can, if you want to go spend time in Coorg or in the Western Ghats somewhere in a homestay, you can do that as well and visit some of these temples along the way. So I think you've also lived in Bangalore. I think one of the best things about the city is not the city itself, but how you can actually get out of the city, and within a 6-hour drive or so, there are so many different things that you can go check out.
True.
And certainly Belur and Halebeedu fall squarely within that ambit. Both of these temples are there in the Hassan district, and you will find many of the temples in the neighboring Chikmagalur district as well.
Okay. And just starting off with the temple at Beluru, right? The Chennakeshava temple. Yeah, this is one of the, I guess between the two, it was the earlier one that was built as well, and also served as the capital of the Hoysalas for a bit, right? Before it was moved to Halebeedu. How was your experience kind of looking at Beluru and even Halebeedu for that matter?
So there's a nice contrast between the two, because Belur is still a living temple. The main idol and so on is intact. In one of them, in the main Channakeshwara temple, the idol is intact. Actually, there is an adjacent temple as well, which is not in worship, but the entire place is fully open for anyone to visit. In fact, there is so much wonderful architecture inside the temple as well, within the walls of the temple, that people actually employ floodlights, and you can, request them. If you go with a guide and so on, they'll, apart from, those who want to go there for worship, if you want to just go explore and check out the architecture there, people will switch on this floodlight and show you the interiors of this, because all of this is carved in black stone, right?
Yeah.
Like, so, and the insides, usually there'll be a sheen of oil on it, and so it'll be different shades of black that you get to see, but you see some extraordinary detail. So Belur is the Vishnu temple, and the beautiful thing is, like, when you think about South Indian temples, or if you just look up temple South India on Google and you get a random image, the defining feature is a gopuram, right? This tall towering structure that's usually at the gate and not actually on the main temple. Whereas that feature only comes about around the time of the Vijayanagara Empire, right? So
That's
after the
much
Hoysala
later,
era. So if you go to Belur today, you will see a gopuram, and in fact, if you're driving towards Belur, you will see the gopuram from 15 minutes away or so. But that was actually built again in the Vijayanagara era. And even in the Tamil Nadu temples, some of which have much, much greater antiquity, they go back, before 1000 AD, the gopurams were all built only in the last 600 years or so, sometimes even as recent as 200 years ago. So that defining feature of South Indian temple architecture comes later. So you look at the Hoysala temples, they're beautiful in their own way. They're quite short. So typically, not more than 25 feet high or so, but they usually have a base which is maybe up to 4 feet tall, or it really depends temple to temple, and there's a many pointed star setup that they have. It could be like a 50 pointed star of some sort, and that becomes the base plan over which the temple gets built, and you can see different kinds of sculpting and architecture at each level of that temple. So the temple wall and the stone is really seen as a canvas by the people who build these temples to showcase architecture and sculpting, and to also tell stories. So you will be able to see bits of the Mahabharata or the Ramayana play out, almost as a reel on the sides of these temples. And at each level, you'll have, a row of elephants on one of them. You'll have a row of, bullocks or people on another row. You will have, statues of Vishnu in various forms, or, Arjuna and so on, at more of an eye level or higher than eye level, all the way up to what are called vimanas, right? So they are usually over the central worship deities, and they're much significantly shorter than the gopurams that people commonly think about. So there's this sort of short stature to these temples that feels a little different from what people can expect. And the other thing about the Hoysala temples is that many of these temples are not having one shrine, but actually 2 or 3 shrines. The word that's used in Sanskrit is trikuta, right? So you go from one entrance, there'll be something on your left, something on your right, and something straight ahead. And so you can think of each of them as having a multi-pointed star architecture and a base plan below. So it's just very beautiful to see. In fact, to me, the only parallel that immediately comes to mind is something like the Petronas Towers and how it was designed, right? If you look at the floor plan and that, the star design, that's the closest I can think of sometimes when I look at these.
Just separated by a few centuries, nevertheless. But yeah, like you said, marvelous kind of architecture.
Yeah, and even the stone, when you look at it, the initial look of it completely stands out compared to all the other temples that we see. Hampi has its own style where even the color of the stone and the material used is so different. Here, you can see that stark difference. The stone that is used, as you were saying, it's black. The entire temple pretty much is in the black hue, and the temple has these different levels. I think there were around 11 or 12 of them. 11, I suppose, right? 11, 11. Layers
or panels.
Level panels, and each panel had one particular concept or one particular, like for example, there were these elephants at the bottom followed by some horses and some like even like some mythical characters, I mean mythical
Right.
characters in between, and then you had the Ramayana and the Mahabharat characters. So Yagi, I think Yagi, I'm not sure, the mythical character, the one with the
I think it's called a yari.
Yali, correct. Yeah. So I remember because we saw that everywhere and we asked a couple of people like, what is this? I think it had a body of, it was different. I think it had
yeah,
a
it was
crocodile's
almost
mouth
like
of,
5-6 animals put into
yeah.
one, I think, something like that, right?
Yeah, so pretty interesting architecture and the details that have gone into making it.
Faiza, absolutely. The yari is this Indian multi-animal fusion thing that you will see on many of the temples, right? So
Yeah.
it'll have like the trunk of an elephant, it'll have the mouth of a crocodile, the head of a lion,
Yeah, a peacock's tail.
some part from a peacock,
Yeah.
and you have different varieties of these yaris as well. And this is a temple motif that you will see across South India. Even you go to the Vijayanagara temples, you will see some version of them. You go to the Chola or the Pallava temples of Tamil Nadu, you will see different versions there. And yeah, it's this. I think it's just a great motif to also for sculptors to play around with, right? Because there is no deep religious connotation. It's not like it's it's Hanuman or something where somebody worships.
Yeah.
So you can actually have a lot of fun. And I think you exactly like I think you mentioned, people had a lot of fun with how they carved out the elephants and the other beasts.
Yeah.
And many times you'll find that, especially with the elephants and other things that run along the length of the temple, many times two of them will never look alike. Right?
Yeah, true.
So you can see a lot of that. And that lends me to another point I wanted to make, which is that very often when we talk about temple architecture, okay, some king commissioned the temple got built, and then we can go see it, and there's a god there, right? I mean, that's how much we usually know. But interestingly, with Belur, there is one sculptor who's become legendary, and his name is Jakanachari.
Okay.
And we don't quite know if he's a historical figure. The historical record of him existing is very weak, or pretty much non-existent, but he is extremely popular as a semi-mythical or quasi-mythical figure who carved these temples.
Okay.
And who's credited with some of the main sculptures, and you will see a lot of stories in Kannada about him. There's probably even a movie made about him a few decades ago. And it's very rare that we actually hear about a sculptor and his story, whether he's mythical or not.
Yeah.
And even in Belur, I'm sure if you go there, the temple tour guides will tell you about how in the temple that is adjacent to the Chennakeshava temple, within the same temple compound, apparently somebody alleges that within the main idol, the idol is actually hollow, and that therefore it is not proper. And apparently the sculptor Jakanachari takes umbrage at that idea and says that no, I mean, if this is hollow, that means I've not done a good job. Then I'll chop off my thumb, or I'll stop sculpting for good. And apparently he goes and cracks the back of the idol, and the idol splits open, and there is a chamber inside, and apparently there's a little bit of water and a frog inside.
Yeah.
And Jakanachari was never to sculpt again. So you have all these cute and fascinating stories and legends that are still associated with the place that go beyond the usual king, god, deity and history, and add a lot of color to the place as well. Yeah, and I also wanted to add, just like you mentioned, how the temple architecture and the stone is different. In fact, so the material that is used is a type of soapstone. Soapstones are available across the world in various ways. Here it was one particular variety of a soapstone called a blue chloritic schist.
Okay.
And the important thing about this stone is that its grain size is very small, right? And the smaller the grain size, the particle size, think of it as, grains of sand that have stuck together to form rock, right? And, the inverse of that. So the grain size is so small, so you can have very, very fine detail. In fact, there are many places where this stone is even carved into individual interlocked links of a chain, right? Entirely of stone. And something like this is not possible in the sandstone that the Chalukyas used in North Karnataka, nor in the granite that is used by the Vijayanagara Empire, that's used by the Cholas, that's used by the Pandavas and many other places. So I think what the Hoysalas managed to do with the stone and how they utilize all of it is fascinating. And the other interesting thing, that stone doesn't survive to this day. That specific variety of soapstone apparently was found somewhere in the Tumkur region near Bangalore. And apparently just in the Hoysala era, it was mined out of existence.
Oh, are you serious?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So if you think quarrying is a problem today, probably quarrying was a problem then too.
Did I hear Reddy Brothers?
Yeah, of their time.
Of those times, right? Yeah.
It shows you how valuable that particular stone was and
True.
how much one could do with it, right?
True.
Yeah, definitely, and especially for the like you touched upon earlier, the kind of competition that was going on for building temples as well, that kind of drove the usage of the stone as well, I guess. But
Yeah.
it's very nuanced, right? These things you don't quite get it when you're looking at from a 10,000 foot view. That you don't quite get it, that just the kind of stone that's being used between these different empires, it might also like bring in a very different feel to the overall architecture. So I think that's another great insight of a lot of these things that you're mentioning over the past few minutes. We did touch upon these two important temples, right, Pavan? One is obviously the temple at Belur, Channakeshava temple, and then later on the newer capital, which is Halebeed, there the Hoysaleshwara temple, I think it was. So those two temples are the more iconic. And beyond this, there's also the Somanathpur temple, right, Pawan? That's a little further away from these two, correct?
Yes. So the temple at Halebeedu, two temples that are next to each other. One of them is the Hoysaleshwara. Those are not living temples because I think the main idol either got destroyed or is no longer in use. So again, the way the tour guides spin it is that in Belur you have the beauty that is inside the walls of the temple, and in Halebeedu the greater beauty is on the outside walls of the temple. I mean, that's how they say it even in Kannada. And you're right, quite far removed from. So Belur and Halebeed are fairly close by, I think within half an hour driving distance of each other. And usually when you go to one, you also go check out the other before moving on.
Yeah.
Somnathpura is actually on the other side of Mysore. So it's easily 4-5 hours from Belur and Halebeed. And it's more like, if you're ever visiting Mysore and if you're looking for places within, say, an hour driving distance of Mysore, Somnathpura becomes one important place. The Somnathpura temple is also for the same deity of Channakeshava. And the good thing about Somnathpura is that it's a well-preserved temple. So it was much farther away. It sort of managed to stay protected for much longer. So it's a one-off site. You go see it. There's not much else of the Hoysala architecture that's near it, but it's a great example temple which sort of exemplifies everything that the Hoysala temples are about. And we've talked about the stone and the sculpture. To me, the one other iconic feature of these temples that you can see is the pillars, right? And if you go to Hampi, the beauty of the pillars are all the carvings and these yardis, these multi-animal beasts that are there on the pillars that are iconic about them. Here, the iconic thing about the pillars is that they are beautifully shiny and they're actually turned on a lathe. So imagine this, 10-ton, 12-ton piece of rock that somebody actually mounted and they spinned it and they, while spinning it, they carve the pillar into a certain shape, right? Like if anyone's done engineering, they would have had one annoying workshop where they'd have to do a lathe and fitting and things like that, right?
Yeah.
And imagine doing that with a piece of stone and having things that carve into it. And so you will have this beautiful shape where each part of the pillar will be perfectly cylindrical, and you'll have different sort of shapes and curves, and each temple will have pillars that look unique because the design that went in, or how they turned the lathe, all that is unique to that particular temple. And sometimes even pillars within the same temple will all have different sort of styles at different levels. And in many temples, including at Somnathpura, you can see that they shine to this day. So they were not only lathe turned but also polished so well and maintained that they're works of art unto themselves.
Absolutely. And yeah, definitely, like I know these probably fitting these two into the same itinerary might not be possible, but Mysore has its own set of places to see and important monuments to check out, right? So definitely include the Somnathpura temple in that itinerary. But it just kind of gives how kind of vast the empire was spread out as well, right? And we're still only talking about the important temples of the place and of the empire. But there's a bunch of temples that have not been, or not much limelight has been shown on them, right, Pavan? The more offbeat temples, if we could call it, the smaller ones that are spread across, say, in and around the Hassan district and places like that. Would you like to touch upon some of those temples as well?
Certainly, Saif. And I would say the best way to travel to some of these temples that are beyond Belur and Halebeed is not necessarily to make a dedicated trip to these places, but if you're ever traveling to Coorg or Chikmagalur, or traveling out of Bangalore in that general direction, I think depending on where you're going, you can always find a Hoysala temple, which is not more than like a 20 or 30 kilometer detour from your route. Say you're going to Mysore and then to Coorg, you can find a few detours and go to a few temples. Say you're going down the road from Bangalore to Mangalore over the Ghats, you can find detours. So a few that I would like to mention is, there's one place that I'm particularly fond of called Belawadi, and Belawadi is within, I think, 10 or 11 kilometers of Halebeedu, right? So it's very close. So in fact, this is one temple you can go and check out when you visit these two main temples. And Belawadi is, I think, hands down, has the most beautiful sculptures of the main deities. Like I mentioned earlier, this is a temple with three shrines, left, right, and center. And you have Krishna on the flute on your left. You have Narasimha seated in a yogic pose on the right, and you have I think it's called Vijaya Narayana or Veera Narayana, victorious Narayana, who's in the center. And the quality of the sculpture on the inside is just, I think, unmatched. It's beautiful. And the great thing about this temple is, if you happen to visit this temple on a weekday, you might have the entire place to yourselves, because it's not on the tourist map. And typically there'll be the caretaker or the purohit's house, which will be next door to the temple. So sometimes it might even be shut, but you go knock on someone's door, they'll open it up. And it's a protected monument, so you have the architectural you have the Archaeological Survey of India, which is maintain this place. And Belawadi is also unique in having a bunch of seating area on the border of the temple, right? So imagine that you sort of get in, but instead of just going out into the open, they've sort of made stone benches with seat rests that just run along the sides of the temple. So it's in that same multi-pointed star fashion. So that's quite unique. So you can just hang out there, and you go to these temples. Sometimes on the floor somewhere, you will see on the floor itself somebody has carved out the outline required for a game. right? Like the traditional Indian games that are out there. So you'll get a feel for something that will get missed in a much more popular tourist destination like Belur or Halebeat, right? Where no matter which day you go, there will always be other people. So that's one. Belawadi is one. There's another place called Javagal, which is probably a little closer to Chikmagalur. Javagal's famous more for Javagal Srinath, the fast bowler,
Yeah.
who I think hails from that village originally,
Right.
and certainly takes his name from there. And Javagal has another beautiful temple there. And similarly, there are so many places. If you're going on the Bangalore highway, if you take a detour about 20-30 kilometers to the right, you get a place called Nuggehalli. And Nuggehalli is a small temple there. And usually it'll be some version of Vishnu who will be worshipped, So it's but each temple will be unique. It'll be a little different from the others. There'll be sometimes a water body or something else nearby, and the whole thing, think of it as, if you have a picnic hamper at home and you're heading out of Bangalore, stop and you can't think of a better place where you can take 2 hours off, have breakfast, and continue your journey. And along the same lines, the one other place that I do want to mention, which is quite unique and not too many people have gone to, is a place called Dodda Gaddavalli. Now,
Okay.
Dodda Gaddavalli is again a detour when you're going from Hassan to Belur. You can find it very easily on the map today, and it has a Lakshmi temple. And we've been talking about how these Hoysala temples are rich for their sculptures on the outside.
Yeah.
This temple is actually unadorned. It's a little older. I don't know how the budget of this temple went, but the outside, the layout is the same, but you have none of the sculptures, so it's quite plain, so it's distinct. But inside, it's a Lakshmi temple, but one of the shrines inside is for Durga. And the most unique thing there is that the doorkeepers of Durga are Betals. Vikram Betal style Betal.
Oh my God. Really?
So and they look terrifying. Usually you will find two sculptures that are mirror images of each other. They'll carry some
Yeah, I think there was one
weapon. They'll
one
have
someone told us that those two women who are carrying pots are generally what's there at the entrances, right? Two women sculptures who look identical. So that is, one is represents Ganga and the other one Yamuna, and about how they cleanse you once you get inside the temple. So that was one of the concept in Someshwara temple in Bangalore, where when you enter the temple, there are two identical women. So one represents Ganga and the other one Yamuna.
Yeah, but
but
Betal is,
Betal,
first.
Yeah, I don't think they're
across that,
meant to
yeah.
cleanse you of anything over here. But I mean, imagine you're inside this place. It's quite dark, and the ceiling is probably 12 feet high or so, and right about from a 3-foot level all the way almost to the ceiling, you have this 6 to 8 foot tall betal that's 2 feet wide or so, and it looks haunting. It has a big open mouth, two huge eyes, a gigantic head, and I don't know of any other place where I've seen anything quite like it.
Yeah.
And the whole temple itself is extremely picturesque. It's at the edge of a small tank or a lake, and I think it's a beautiful place to just sit and zone out and just relax for an afternoon when it's pleasant.
Yeah, I don't know about zone out or freak out. I guess if I've run into the Betal sculptures without expecting them. But yeah, it certainly seems to be like a gem, right? These are some of them that you really don't come across in whatever mainstream guides or itineraries or blogs that you kind of happen to touch upon when you look up for things. So really, really interesting to find these out. Any more kind of these offbeat gems that you'd like to call out, Pavan?
So I would actually say that if you're ever traveling in South Karnataka, figure out your destination and your route. And if you just look up Hoysala temples of Karnataka, you will find something within a 20-kilometer distance of your route, right? So beyond these, I would like to call out others that I've visited. There's Hoysala, which is between Hassan and Mysore somewhere. There's another place called Mosale with a nice temple. But there are so many more. If you go further up north from Chikmagalur on towards Shimoga, you'll find even more temples. There's a place called Amrutapura, and it's if you see 20 of them, you might get bored with the 21st. But until you've seen 20, I think each one of these will be an experience unto themselves. So it's entirely about where you're going and what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And just touching upon the empire in itself, right? Like you mentioned, early, I guess, late 900s, early thousands is when it kind of came into prominence, and it lasted for the following 300-400 years. But after that, the kind of decline was also quite, I guess, eventful and dramatic, right? In the sense of the temples from what we had over 1,000 to suddenly like things changing, and we had like invasions and incursions from the north that started to come into this part of the region, etc. So would you like to throw some limelight on that, like the events that followed after the period of prominence of the Hoysalas?
Certainly. So the Hoysalas, again, starting from humble origins, became a fairly large kingdom and then an empire. And at one point, you had Hoysala kings who would, play the big brother in family feuds in Tamil kingdoms, between the Pallavas and the Cholas, who were very much in their decline at that point. But one thing I think that catches many of the South Indian kingdoms off guard is the rise of the Delhi Sultanate, right? And Alauddin Khilji and others who come in actually with far superior sort of military prowess and so on. And they also have many raids and others which come deep to the south. There's especially talk of Malik Kafur, who leads multiple campaigns into South India. And many of these temples are also very well endowed, rich places, right? So I mean, there's sources of wealth that are obviously coveted. So I think in that process, you see some of the temples taking a hit, but more importantly, the empire starts to lose its grip. I think there are many times where the king and the army would be far away, and you have soldiers and troops which have sort of reached almost Halebidu. And you also have stories of Hoysala king sort of submitting to some of them, finding a route for them over the Malabar, over the Western Ghats and into the Malabar region and so on. But ultimately the Hoysala kings and the empire, I think, meets an end with one important final battle in Tamil Nadu. But actually what they do is you see them on the decline, and within 100 years you see the Vijayanagara on the rise on the banks of the Tungabhadra, right? So I think it's a flux of power, right? So if one power center dwindles, another power center will rise. So I think that's just the way in which a lot of these kingdoms worked. And I mean, think about it, right? I mean, the Republic of India is now what, 70 something years old. It's very young. For any single empire or kingdom to even last for 200-300 years is quite amazing in and of itself. The one thing I do want to say is that many times we mistakenly see that we lost these temples because you had invaders who came, looted and destroyed all of them. Most of the times that's not true, right? So with Hoysalas, we know that they roughly built about 1,000 temples, and about 200-250 survive to this day. And I think most of them were just lost due to loss of patronage, right? So if imagine that you leave a house abandoned for a decade, what happens to it, right? It'll start crumbling. It's not very different with a temple, if it's just left alone for a couple of generations. And some of these temples need a lot of money and a lot of things for upkeep, right? And even today, you look at the protected monuments, ASI or somebody else is doing a lot of work to, prop up something. They would undertake extensive renovations sometimes because the stones are falling off, so you need to rebuild a foundation or reinforce a pillar or do something. So I think just over hundreds of years, things happen. And hey, I mean, there's always vandalism and other things that also happen, right? Like to this day, there's temple theft that happens. Because there's some valuables there and somebody wants to go and steal it. No other reason bigger than that, right? And that has happened through history as well. So I think sometimes I just want to put a caution that we paint too many grand religious narratives around why some of these temples no longer exist or are in ruins, but usually the reasons are far simpler than that.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting perspective to look at it as well, and something that makes sense too. It's just something that is usually not kind of portrayed in mainstream media, right? But thank you for overall. I think it's such a beautiful picture of this entire timeline of 400, 500 years and how these beautiful monuments came into being, and a lot of these intricacies, right from the kind of stones they use to the connection between the kind of level of detail that these temples and these monuments would get into just because of the kind of stone they were using in comparison to some of the different empires from the other times, etc. So it was wonderful like listening to this narrative of yours and your personal experience also visiting these. I really hope that everyone gets a chance to go beyond the Belur Halebeedu. Obviously these are beautiful, and if you haven't had a chance to visit them, definitely do go there. But some of these gems that you called out outside of the mainstream, those are brilliant, and I really hope that we can sometime kind of get to cover those off as well during our travels. Pavan, as we kind of start to wrap this up, any final thoughts about the empire in itself?
Not too many about the empire, but I want to get back to travel. I listen to the Musafir stories, and with many other places, you really have to wonder about what is the best time of the year to visit these places, right? But I don't think that's a problem here at all. I mean, you've been in Bangalore. It was fine pretty much at any point in the year. It's pretty much the same with these temples as well. There's a certain beauty to the drive and everything during the monsoon because everything is a different shade of green.
Right.
And if you actually go into the heart of the Hoysala country, you will, cross the Hemavati river at some point. You will go to its, tributaries like the Yagachi and so on, and you'll see a lot of smaller lakes and tanks that will be overflowing during the monsoon. So that's an experience. But any other time of the year too, they are very accessible. They're never too hot. I mean, maybe avoid it in the end of April, the first week of May, which is pretty much when Karnataka becomes a little hot compared to other places. But outside of that, you can check these places out anytime. I'd say the one drawback or challenge with these places is you can certainly take even state government buses and get to Belur and Halebeed, but many of these other places will be hard to visit unless you have a car, you're driving, or you've rented a car out. So that's a drawback. But the good thing is whether if you're going on any other trip, you can also visit these.
Yeah.
So there are good places to stay nearby at various price points, especially in Chikmagalur or in Hassan. There's also something called as the Hoysala Village Resort, I think, which is on the high end. But sometimes will make a lot more sense for people to do this ex-Bangalore and try and come back to the city. So I just wanted to put that out there because I think with many of the other wonderful places that you discuss on the podcast, you also get to live there and stay there and spend a few days there, be it in Orcha or in Hampi or somewhere else, right? It'll be difficult to do that with the Hoysala temples, and perhaps that's why our episode has also taken a different shape today than some of the other places and the other experiences.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Pavan, and thank you so much for calling that out. Somehow I think we just took it for granted being in Bangalore that, we can visit considering the weather. But yeah, thank you so much for calling that out to our listeners that you can definitely go ahead and visit the Hoysala temples at any time during the year. One place where, if the weather is bad somewhere, just come down to Bangalore and you can go and visit the Hoysala
otherwise
temples.
it's also like you called out earlier as well, great to kind of cover these off as a part of your overall bigger itinerary to say a different place in the vicinity. Just make a stop over at this point and then you can proceed to your next destination.
Yeah, and I think it gives you a perspective about how different it was, like within a few hundred years, how different the architecture style changed, how different the use of material, and what was the overall the overall temple architecture also, with how it was represented. The Hoysala temples definitely stand out in a very different manner. So yeah, definitely something that y'all have to go and see. And thank you so much, Pavan, for calling out all these factors and like transforming us to like a different era, and then again like pulling us back into how beautiful it is now and taking us all around. So thank you so much.
Thank you for not just travel but also some time travel.
Yeah, time travel.
What it felt like. But it was wonderful.
My pleasure entirely. Thank you so much for having me.
That was yet another great episode of the Musafir Stories. If you guys like the show, please subscribe to us on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, Savan, Pocket Casts, Castbox, Stitcher, or any other podcasting app available on iOS or Android. Please do leave us a review on iTunes. It goes a long way in the show's discoverability. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. We go by the handle The Musafir Stories. Or, if it suits you, you could email us at themusafirstories@gmail.com or visit our website at www.themusafirstories.com for more information. All of these links will be made available in the show notes section of each episode. So here's to more traveling, sharing, and inspiring. Stay tuned for our next episode. Until then, happy travels and goodbye.